Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. We've got Saqib Chaudhri here today, principal in South West London, and he's going to obviously come and talk to us about kind of his journey and kind of his views on education and where education is at the moment. I mean, Saqib, thanks for joining us. Could you kind of introduce yourself and kind of tell everyone who you are in your journey in education?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, TJ. So in terms of who I am, Saqib Chaudhri, I am a principal of a secondary school in sixth form in Southwest London, kind of Southeast London too. It's more or less exactly south, but there's no postcode for just south. So there you go, but that's the nature of living in Croydon. So I've been teaching now for around 16, 17 years. I made a decision about 5-6 years ago to get into leadership in teaching. Previous to that, I was a head of computer science, and then the head of computing and design faculty in an outstanding school. So I decided to take the jump, and I think what I found most difficult about moving into leadership was the gulf between middle leadership and senior team. It's a huge difference in terms of how you operate, how you think, and how you work. And so in order to support me through that kind of transition, if you like, I signed up with what was at the time Future Leaders, what is now the Ambition Institute. I think it's the third iteration of their name. And Future Leaders, I joined in about 2015, 2014, something like that. And they were fantastic. They really gave me the skills that I needed in order to move forwards. And since then, I've had a number of senior team roles in a number of senior teams across South London, in lots of different types of schools, and gained a huge amount of experience and knowledge of how schools operate. And I was very fortunate to be offered the headship at my current school, Oasis Academy, Shirley Park, fantastic school in South London. So I've been a head there for just over a year now.
Fantastic. Talk about your first headship in the pandemic. Jesus Christ, you're very brave. I mean, how has it been? I mean, how difficult has it been over this year for you?
Yeah, I think I would have been braver if I'd made the decision when I knew the pandemic was coming. I didn't really know what was going to hit me at the time. It's been. I think it's been just as tricky for anyone, really. I mean, I think it didn't matter how experienced you were as a head teacher. The pandemic was a game changer for everyone. You needed to take a new approach, a fresh approach, a new mentality into your work. Who would have thought that I needed to become a certified NHS tester for a pandemic? Who would have known that I needed to close down my school because of the infection rates? And so, it's been a journey in a great unknown in many ways. It's been a huge learning curve for everyone, and it's been challenging because it's been my first year of headship. But to be honest with you, I think it doesn't matter if you've been in this game 20 years. I think it would have been possibly even more challenging if I was set in my ways and used to my routines, and then all of a sudden, it was something completely different to what I'd done for the last decade. It has been a challenge in many ways, but it's been a challenge, I think, for everyone.
Of course. I mean, let's talk about the kind of general demographics of Shirley Park, Oasis Shirley Park. I mean, what kind of population is around the area? What kind of students go to your school?
So it's a Croydon population, if you know Croydon at all. It's very much Croydon. We are a school for the local community and of the local community. So I myself grew up in Croydon. I grew up about a mile and a half away from where the school is now. The demographics of the school are that they are the demographics that you would find of any kind of inner city London school. We've got a real mix of prior attainment. We've got a real mix of socio-economic economic benchmarks in our students. We've got a higher than average degree of disadvantage amongst our pupils. We've got a higher than average degree of special educational learning needs. And so in all of those ways, it's very much, although we're technically classed as an outer London borough and an outer London school, I think, you wouldn't find any differences between the challenges that we have in comparison to an inner city school. The difficulty with Croydon is that the north of Croydon is very much a metropolitan area. It's very busy. It's very urban, very built up. And then the south of Croydon is very different. You've got farms and fields, and it's a totally different totally different demographic. And so I think, you know, Croydon in itself has challenges in the north of Croydon in that way. But, you know, so that's the context of the school, but the school itself has been on a real journey. Oasis Academy Shirley Park was built on the foundations of a failing school, which was called Ashburton High School in Croydon. Ashburton High School was duly closed down, and on its foundations, they basically built a new school with new building, a brand new school, a brand new environment, a brand new senior team, etc., etc. So that was 11 years ago, and you know, we still teach that very same community, but we've had a real success in terms of turning around that community's outlook and those communities' ambitions and that community's you know, attainment and progress. And so this year marks the first year that we've had a student go into Oxford and Cambridge. Most of our students now go to their first choice of university. Around 80% of our students go to their first choice university. We've got a progress score that puts us on par with the top 17% of the country in terms of Key Stage 4, and top 1% of the country for Key Stage 5. So, you know, we're really proud of our successes given our context, but context is never an excuse for a lack of aspiration for our young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just wanted to, obviously, I knew that about Oasis Shirley Park in terms of obviously the demographics. What I wanted to do was get the audience to understand exactly the kind of school you run. Now, obviously, a lot of kids from your school, they come from really like disadvantaged backgrounds in some respects, don't they? And it's difficult for some of your kids, especially over the pandemic. I mean, what are the main challenges that you found as being a head teacher? It's been in particular being a new head teacher, but then on top of that, the kind of support that you might have needed from the government.
Many really. So yeah, absolutely. So we've got around a 40% pupil premium percentage in our school, which means that there is some degree of social disadvantage, economic disadvantage in our community. We're very aware of that. Our pupils make, our disadvantaged pupils especially, make progress way above national average for that group of students. And so, you know, we serve our community, and we serve it in terms of fulfilling the needs of that community without lowering the bar for aspiration. So, you know, our aims for our students and my ambitions for my community is really high. We want our students going to Oxford. We want our students going to Cambridge. We want our students doing those courses that are really going to prepare them for the future. Yeah. So that's very much what we're about. In terms of relating that to the context of the pandemic, of course, we know that disadvantaged students don't learn as well at home than you know, more economically, you know, stable backgrounds. We know that disadvantaged students have a higher tendency to drop out of education as a result of being out of education, formal education in this way, for such a long time. Home learning doesn't work for them in the same way it works for middle class parents. Home learning has lots and lots of barriers to it, and although we try and remove those barriers as much as we can, and my school in particular, we're really proud of our home learning offer. You know, when the lockdown happened last year, so when the first lockdown happened, we set up an online learning school for our entire school community within 3 weeks. So within 3 weeks, we had rethought everything, our curriculum, our systems, and we'd set up an online school for our students, because we knew that you know, young people across the country are going to be sitting at home. They get all of those factors that play in, even to adults. You know, I'm sure you speak to many adults who have really struggled in the pandemic with loneliness. You might be in a house full of people, but the fact that you've been there for week on week, day after day, and that routine, you know, doesn't change, that can cause a huge amount of mental health problems, a huge amount of anxieties. And, you know, so at the forefront of my mind, and I say it to my staff all the time, at the forefront of my mind is the well-being of our students. And one of the reasons why we provided that education for them so early is so that we could make sure that they've got something to do. You know, because like my dad used to say to me when I was a kid, the leaf that doesn't sway from the tree falls from the branch. Okay, you know, you've got to move, you've got to keep active, you've got to keep doing things. And if you just stand still for too long in that moment, then you will lose yourself a little bit. Yeah. And so in many ways, I wanted my young people to be engaged, but I also wanted every single child in my school to make sure that they've had a phone call home, if not on a basis of every single week they're being called home, because we just want to make sure they're okay. Then within that lockdown, you know, several phone calls for each one of my students. And so so the challenges were really making sure that our students are safe. making sure that they're well, making sure that they're healthy, making sure that they're fed. So, I dropped food parcels home like many head teachers have up and down the country. We've made sure that we've mobilized as many people as we can in the school community, and in that way, everyone's played their part. Our TAs have been an absolute army in terms of delivering food and making sure our young people are cared for, especially our vulnerable provision on site. Our teachers have been fantastic in terms of the delivery of the curriculum and meeting the needs of that new environment. And, our office team have been fantastic just because they've had to man the phones every single day. They've had to be in more than most other staff have needed to be in. So everyone's played their role in that pandemic. Everyone's playing their role currently in the pandemic. And it's a huge stress and a strain on the system. Absolutely. And so that's been my priority going forwards. But I don't think that priority would have changed if my school context had been any different, to be honest with you. Absolutely, for many of my students, the need is greater, but the provision that we are offering is the very best provision, and we would have offered that regardless of what kind of context we would have been in. We would have provided as much online learning as we possibly can. We would have provided as much contact home as we possibly can. We would have made sure that we're ensuring that our young people are fed and safe as much as we possibly can. And I think everyone's doing that up and down the country. So I'm really proud of how quickly we were able to mobilize as a school during the pandemic last year, and that really set us up really well for this pandemic. Although the government guidelines have now very clearly stated what online learning should look like, our online learning program last year went above and beyond what the current requirements are already. And that just gives you an idea of just how seriously we took the need of our young people and making sure we meet what they want. We meet the needs of what the situation wants, if you like. And so they were the huge challenges that I had to think through in terms of where we were at the moment. In terms of answering your question of like, what have I struggled with in terms of help from the government? Do you want to just that's a huge question. Do you want to just narrow that down for me a little bit, TJ?
I mean, ultimately, look, one of the things in particular, especially recently, as head teachers, you've had to ask your staff to come into school without the sort of the right amount of preparation, and then only to ask them to come in, and for obviously the government to do a U-turn last second. I mean, you're asking these teachers to risk their lives to come in. You can get COVID at any moment. Some of your teachers may be vulnerable. Some of your school staff may be vulnerable, and that's what. And in some respects, if something happens to them, that's on you in some respects. And it's all moral obligation that you have in to your kids and then also to your staff.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And in many ways, especially during this time, I think you asked me at the start, the first year of headship, how has it been? And I think, to be honest with you, I didn't realize how much of a humanitarian I was, if you like, until my first year of headship. How every single teacher is a humanitarian, don't get me wrong, because we work in a selfless kind of industry, right? We're there for our students, and they are the reason we get up and we do what we do every single day. But for me, having the responsibility of 1,000 students and having the responsibility of 130, 140 members of staff has really weighed heavy on my mind even before the pandemic, because teaching is a tough game. Don't get me wrong. It's a demanding career of anyone. And so I have always been acutely aware of the pressures that teachers are under up and down the country. I've always been acutely aware of the demands we make of our staff, whether that's the marking that they need to do or the amount of hours they need to be in on the school site. I would turn up at my school at 7 o'clock in the morning, TJ, and I wouldn't be the first car to park up. And I'm leaving school at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and I won't be the last car leaving. And that just is a reflection of just how hard our staff work. And that's true up and down the country. And so absolutely, that has been at the forefront of my mind in terms of making sure that our young people are safe, but also that our school is safe. And in this time, what can you do above trying to mitigate the risk? And, what we've tried to ensure every single step of the way is that we consult our staff in what we do. And so you said quite a lot of things. I think that's the nature of where you ask questions. You pack loads in there. But there's a few things that I want to talk around. So firstly, around mitigating risk, I guess, right? So how do you make sure that your site is safe, but also that your staff are reassured by the safety measures you've put in. It's really easy. It's not really easy, but the starting of that is really easy. You have an inclusive conversation where everyone's input is meaningful, you know, and that's really important because everyone's roles are slightly different. A teacher will be thinking about their day-to-day, and the last time I was a classroom teacher was a long time ago. I had a lot more hair on my head, right? And so what you need to make sure you're absolutely doing is taking everyone's context, not just assuming you know what their day-to-day duties look like, but taking their context into consideration. And so we have a really broad, diverse of representation on our health and safety committee. And my health and safety committee now is the center of all of our work. So on there, I've got teachers, I've got heads of department, I've got IT staff, I've got premises staff, I've got admin staff. You know, as much of my school makeup as I can get, I've got on that health and safety committee. And we meet every single week to agree what the priorities are, to go through what the risk assessments are, to make sure that we know how we're mitigating risk together. Because that's the only way you're going to beat this thing, is by doing it together. There's no other way of doing it. And so the first thing you do is you include everyone. You talked about the clinically vulnerable people, and you know there's a difference between being clinically vulnerable and clinically extremely vulnerable. And just, you know, as from my position, getting up to date in terms of what those terms mean, who those people are, where are they in my school, what job role do they carry out. But then again, going back to my basic point about being a humanitarian and including everybody in what you do, you have conversations with those people about their work. You know, there's no way I can eradicate risk, TJ. There's no way at all that what I do will guarantee someone's safety. But we're not living in a time where anyone's guaranteed safety. You know, you can just go to the shops and you're not guaranteed your safety, right? So that's the nature of the world that we live in right now. So what's my job? My job is to mitigate that risk, reduce it as much as humanly possible within my school environment, while sustaining something meaningful for my students and staff, and while sustaining something that's manageable for everyone.
I understand.
Right?
I mean, let me just ask you about that though. So, I mean, obviously, especially in particular this week, obviously we've got the decision like at the beginning that the schools were going to go in. I mean, there were so many teachers that I've spoken to this week that just didn't feel comfortable going in, regardless of like the fact that whether they were completely extremely vulnerable or not, they just didn't feel comfortable because they live with vulnerable people or for whatever reason, right? I mean, and their head teachers were still expecting them to come in. Now, ultimately, the unions are saying don't go in. The head teachers need them to come in because they're following government guidelines. I mean, what is a teacher meant to do in that situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can only speak, I mean, I'm not a national representative, so I'm not going to speak on a national level either for like union bodies or for other people. You know, I can only speak in terms of what I did and what we did as an organization. So as you know, my school is part of the Oasis Academy Trust. And Oasis thought long and hard about the decisions that they were going to make. And, you know, all the head teachers got together on the weekend with the CEO, and our CEO is in many ways a humanitarian too. And what we did, and I can understand the anxieties around people having to return on January the 4th and January the 5th, on that Monday and Tuesday, having to return and then teach. Right. So what we did is we had inset days on that January the 4th, on that January the 5th. And what that allowed us to do was make sure that we had consulted staff in terms of risk, had taken every single step that we could in terms of adding extra layers of precaution, but it also gave time for the dust to settle in terms of government thinking. You know, and so we weren't asking, you know, children to come in and staff to teach from that Monday. We weren't asking students and staff to come in and teach from the Tuesday. And the decision on the Tuesday was made strictly from a health and safety perspective. So it gave principals and school teachers all time to get clarity around how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we double down on our efforts in what we've been doing in school? You know, and one thing that Oasis have always done is put you know, they've had a safety first kind of approach, if you like. So there is no mandated policy around masks in the classroom. We've had masks in the classroom since September. You know, there's lots of things that we have put in place, like, you know, additional hand washing stations. And I'm not just talking about sanitizing your hands. We've actually bought these mobile sinks that we've got around the school. Students can wash their hands when they come in, wash their hands between break and lunch. wash their hands, sanitize between lessons, etc., etc. So all of that has happened. And so I guess to answer your question, I can't speak for those teachers, and I can totally just empathize and understand that situation, that difficult situation of having to go in on the first day. I can speak for myself and what I did, and what we did was put in those 2 training days. Of course, this argument around whether or not the schools were safe, and the argument around whether or not teachers should have been asked to come in. You know, I don't know the ins and outs of the health and safety law that was used in order to find the clause of whether or not staff could come in. And that's still, you know, if you look at the DfE website today, they've released some further guidance around whether or not the NEU and the other unions were correct in using that clause for whether or not staff could come in or not. I mean, that in itself is a whole different category altogether, isn't it? And so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with you, TJ, because I don't have the answers to that, unfortunately. And the people who do should have had those answers a lot quicker, is the only thing that I can say.
I agree. I mean, like, obviously, as a head teacher, on the 31st of December, you're getting an email saying that they've got to come in, and you've got to like prepare to come in. And then on the 4th of January, you're getting a decision. Actually, no, we've done a U-turn. I mean, like, what's going through your mind? I mean, like, you're kind of switching back and forth in some respects, and the burden, unfortunately, falls on your shoulders as a head teacher, and you've got to still get your staff motivated. I mean, like, what do you need from the government? What do you need them to do to support you and make this more like make this easier for you and to give you more support?
Yeah, so at the end of the last lockdown, TJ, if you remember what was said, the key indicator at the end of the last lockdown in terms of how serious the pandemic was becoming and what measures would need to be put in place by central government was the R rate, was the reinfection rate. And we were told that as long as that R rate stays below 1, then we should be okay to carry out our daily lives. But you know, that was all the way back in, you know, September or something, July. I don't know, it's all a blur. But you know, that was when we were given that advice, and I took that advice on board, as you know, as you would do. But since then, other metrics have come into play, and yeah, there is a degree of bad luck in terms of this new COVID variant and how quickly it can spread, and the changes that it's had the changes the government has had to make in terms of dealing with this new outbreak. I can understand all of that, but what there isn't for me is a couple of things really. Clarity around what metrics are being used to make what decision. You know, when do we go from tier 4 to tier 5? At what point does somebody make that call? How comes when we went into tier 4, there were still areas of the country who were in tier 2, but are now also in tier 5? You know, and so for me, there is a lot of confusion. First and foremost, you know, I don't know where these decisions are being made from, and if you don't know what decisions are based on, right? Then then all you can do is you can't see the input and the process behind those decisions. You only see the outcome of those decisions, you know. And when those, well, this is the problem, right? And when those outcomes are decisions that are made 24 hours beforehand or 48 hours beforehand, you know, they affect you massively. So, you know, for example, you know, during the Christmas holidays, and I know that I'm not alone on this, but I had my bags packed and we were all ready to go and see our family up north, right? So I was packed and ready because originally, you know, we had planned to go away abroad over the Christmas period. That wasn't happening. So then we were told that you can have these Christmas bubbles of 2 households getting together. So we thought, great, we're going to go and see family, right? Yeah. We'll stay in a hotel because it's not great to stay overnight and all of those things. And we're going to go see our family, but keep ourselves as safe as possible. So our bags were packed and we were ready. And then literally the announcement on the TV was, if you've packed your bags, you need to unpack your bags. And so that's what we had to go ahead and do, you know? And then, as you say, the announcements around schools and the announcements around testing and the announcements around reopening and the announcements around staggering the return of students, etc., etc. I mean, all of that has just been so last minute. But not only has it been last minute, that I haven't been able to keep up with these announcements because I've had no idea that they're coming, because I've got no idea what they're based on. Right? I don't know what metrics they are based on. And because I don't know what metrics they're based on, it means that I can't prepare, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so what I need is some clarity around why these decisions are being made, so that I can almost see why those decisions are going to happen in the next couple of days, and I can prepare myself. But what there is at the moment is these last minute decisions. And don't get me wrong, you know, this is true of many people and many industries. And, you know, I feel so sorry for our retail, for our hospitality industries, because I'm saying all of this and I'm complaining about all of these things, but I've still got a job.
Yeah, but it's
not
just about that. Sorry to interrupt, but I understand what you're saying. But you're talking about the future of these kids. Like it's not just about you having a job, but you're talking about like 1,000 children's futures that we're talking about here. So it's like you need the time to prepare to make sure that you're going to do best for these kids. Because that's what it's about. The future of our economy depends on these children. You know, like how are you meant to do your job to get the teachers?
Yes, really good point.
You know, like it's not about you earning your salary. It's about these kids potentially having a salary in the future and being like there emotionally to be able to handle the situation.
Well, there's two things there, and I'll unpick them in a moment, and I'll tell you why I said that specifically. Nationally, we've seen over a 40% increase in vulnerable students. Okay, what does that mean? That means a 40% increase in for lots of different reasons, and I want to be specific about why I spoke about having a job, because up and down the country, people are losing their jobs, right? Up and down the country, and many of our families, especially the context that we're in, many of our families are becoming unemployed. Many of our students who weren't free school meals are becoming free school meals. And what's even worse is students who aren't statistically qualifying for free school meals right now, those households would still massively benefit from them, because what they're doing is using their savings to get by in this current time. And so the reason I related to those industries in particular is because if someone's watching this and is working in the hospitality industry and is sitting at home and thinking about the difficulties that I'm going through, right? As I said to you before, my mindset is all about thinking about the humanitarian aspect of this pandemic beyond anything else. And so for those people who have either been furloughed or been made redundant, such as many of our parents have, for them, there is this extra layer of stress. Yes, there's the stress of schooling, and I'll get back to the stress of schooling in a moment, but we have to understand as a society the damage that this is doing economically. So on that point, really, I understand the need for schools to remain open. You know, I understand the need for our young people to be educated so that they can have that bright future that we always tell them about, right? But I understand the need for our schools to be open so that we can allow society to function. Yeah. And so, yeah, 100%, you're right in terms of like, what about the needs of the students? What about the needs of the students learning? But beyond anything, like I said to you before, TJ, it's near on impossible for me to say that students learning at home are getting the best possible learning that they can possibly get, you know? And so it's not about setting up this online learning. Absolutely, that's the best we can make of a bad situation, but it's about getting our schools reopened. Yeah. And so how do I know what it is that needs to happen until my schools are reopened? I don't know, because previously,
I know.
Go on, sorry.
I mean, they need to put you straight on the priority list in group 1 and give you the jabs and the vaccines and get schools back open. I mean, why is that?
Well, there's the $1 million thing, really. So, like in terms of vaccines, right? In terms of teachers being on the vaccine list, like why was there not a consideration from the get-go in terms of teachers being on the vaccine list? I don't know, you know, and it's mind-boggling why that's not the case, you know. And again, if I knew what the metrics were for these decisions, then I might be able to think, oh, okay, teachers as an industry have got this infection rate. Sorry, my screen went blank. Teachers at an industry I've got this infection rate. The hospitality sector's got this infection rate, but the medical staff have got this infection rate. But I don't know, you know, why were hospital staff and GP surgeries given the same degree of priority? Are they at the same degree of risk? I don't know the answer to that. You know, why have some industries been chosen over others? I don't know the answer to that. So it comes back to my point, TJ, about knowing the metrics behind these decisions. Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, if we all get vaccinated during this lockdown as teachers, yeah, then we can reopen schools, and we've got a very strong platform. Forget my risk assessment. We've also got that platform of the vaccines being there, you know, which is a much stronger platform to stand on than the testing strategy. Don't get me wrong, the testing strategy moves us forward in terms of health and safety, right? It does move us forward in terms of health and safety, but it's an extra complication, an extra layer for head teachers to unpick and do at the last minute. And you know, the vaccine is, if you like, the golden bullet in all of that, isn't it? It would solve so many issues all at once, but I don't know what the complications are.
Yeah.
And this is my biggest problem, is like, it doesn't matter what I read, it doesn't matter what I listen to or what I watch. I don't seem to get an understanding of the underlying measures that are being monitored day to day in order to make these decisions. Because if the reinfection rate is the measurement that we are using, and if the projections of the reinfection rate are the measurements that we are using, then we should have made some decisions before Christmas, some tough decisions before Christmas, in order for us to not be here now.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's just so frustrating, because even in the speech today, I mean, he speaks about the 80. I mean, Boris spoke about the 88% of the deaths that have happened in the last year. Those are in that first group, but the whole virus has mutated. it's affected a completely different set of people now. I mean, it's not what they're saying. I mean, it's completely bonkers, because what they're saying now is that the infection is in children. I mean, it's massively within children, and that's why they've had to close the schools down. So why are they basing it off results of the previous mutation? You know, I mean, it's like we're just getting nowhere. I feel like every time there's a glimmer of hope, we're back to square one. And I feel like when we compare ourselves to different countries, like where education has always been like at the top priority, here in the UK, I feel like we're in a constant like political football against the economy and education, where like we're talking about the future of our economy and the future of our kids here. I mean, like, it's far more important. Like, just what we should have done was probably lock down the country for the first 3-4 months, just let everything cool off. And like Australia did, like China did, like Singapore did, and just keep it on track. But they talk about this world-class track and trace system. I mean, how world-class has it been for you as a head teacher in your school?
The track and trace system isn't something that I've been directly involved. I've got the app on my phone, like I think everyone else has. And I've been scanning and signing in to places as I go, but it's not something that's directly affected our school. What we have had to do in school is a system around test and trace. And so, for example, where we've had a positive case in the school, whether that's a staff member or a student, we've had to trace all of their close contacts. So whoever they've been near for a certain degree of time, so like 2 meters, they've been within 2 meters of someone for 15 minutes, or they've been within 1 meter of someone for more than 1 minute. And we've traced that person's, you know, day back or several days back, that they could have been infectious according to Public Health England. And then we've identified all the people who might be close contacts, and then we've sent those people home. How effective that's been, I couldn't tell you, because I can only go anecdotally by my school, you know, and you would have to look at the national picture, but clearly they were the measures we were doing the whole of last term. But this term we find ourselves in lockdown. So nationally, I guess they weren't as impactful as they needed to be. I guess anecdotally, my school remained open right until Christmas. We didn't need to close due to the infection rates, which I'm very pleased about. But that's just anecdotal evidence, you know. What we need is a system that works. And you're right. Again, you'd have to ask the politicians, because I don't know the ins and outs of why it worked in Australia. Why has it worked in, you know, other built-up urban areas, but it hasn't worked for us in London, and it hasn't worked for us as a country in terms of the UK. I don't know the answer to those questions, unfortunately. And the problem is, and this is the greatest difficulty, is that there doesn't seem to have been any kind of strategy. There doesn't seem to have been any kind of system in place. And I just worry, because, you know, for something that's so destructive for something that's caused so many job losses, so many people to change their lives, so many young people to have been increased in disadvantage. You know, what is the strategy? How are we going to come out of this? And where are we going? I still don't see one. And so, of course, you know, the vaccine, like you said, is the golden bullet in all of this. It's like, you know, it's got the potential to save us. But again, what is the difficulty with getting it rolled out in the numbers that it needs to be? I don't know.
I mean, I do find that the government's plans are always so reactive. It's like build the virus and then work on trying to sort places where we can distribute it. I mean, why shouldn't? Why? I mean, like, in my opinion, if I was them, I mean, it just seems common sense to me. But while the virus is, the vaccine is developing and it's on its way, you know, it's on its way. Just get everything set up so you can roll it out. I mean, it just seems like they do one thing, then they do another thing, and it's very reactive. You know, like it's just so frustrating to be like to watch. But I mean, like in terms of obviously the way that the government have handled education this year, I mean, do you feel like it has been handled well, or do you think there needs to be a shift in the way that education is run in the UK?
Oh, do I think it's been handled well in terms of the pandemic? You know, there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of disorder. And we've struggled through many things. Don't get me wrong, I'm delighted that I could open my school in September. And I know loads of work would have gone in from central government in terms of how we could have opened our schools and reopened them in September fully for every single student, you know? And so I don't quite understand what those difficulties were. Like I said to you before, if I knew the numbers that we were relying on, then I'd know what difficulties we're in. But to be honest with you, I don't know what numbers we were relying on because there are so many flying around. You know, what needs to change is that we need some clear strategy around this. Schools need a heads up. This is coming, you know, and a heads up isn't the day before the term ends. A heads up isn't the day before or the day after students have started attending school. You know, that's not a heads up. We need some sort of timeline in which to work. So if something is being rolled out, I understand that there isn't enough time for a consultation period because we're in the middle of a pandemic. I understand that. And so what I'm not asking for is a lengthy consultation period, but what I am asking for is adequate notice that doesn't add to the stresses that we're already going through as an industry, you know? And so what needs to change as a result of that? Would a new education secretary help? I don't know. I don't know because there's no benchmark to how we handle these things. But I know that things haven't been done right. You know, today we've been told around the January exams being cancelled. I understand that the January exams needed to be cancelled for very good reason, you know, for the safety and well-being of my staff and my students. Absolutely, I understand that, and it's the right decision. But what about my exams that are going to happen in February? Because I have got exams that are due to happen in February, and they're only, you know, 3 weeks away. What's going to happen with them? I still don't have any clarity on that. I would like clarity on that, the sooner the better, so I can plan for them and prepare for them. My worry is that I'll get clarity on them the day before the exams are meant to take place, like I did today. So that's my biggest problem with all of this. You know, my biggest problem with all of this is the timelines that we're given to work in. They're just not good enough. And there's no way, as a leader, I would expect myself to be giving these kinds of timelines for my own school staff to turn around in, you know? So it's just not right that we have to work in these kinds of timelines. And I would understand if there was no other choice today. I would understand if the nature of this problem meant that things needed to be done in 24 hours, but they don't, because we have data that builds up over time. We have weeks and weeks of data, you know? And so the nature of the data that's available tells me that the timelines can be forecasted, right? And if you can forecast things, then you can plan and you can prepare.
Yeah.
But the difficulty I have is that things don't seem to be clear in terms of why decisions are being made. And that's the biggest difficulty I have, is that when you don't have the clarity, then there's a huge problem. You know, the fact that devices are being rolled out to students right now is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. A great decision made by the DFE to mobilize these hundreds of thousands of devices. You know what would have been But hold on, you know what would have been the right decision though, TJ, is if those devices were mobilized 3 weeks ago and we were told about this lockdown happening because of the trajectory that we were on in terms of infection rates.
Yeah.
That would have been fantastic. Is that something that the education secretary is able to do? I don't know. That's my biggest problem right now, is that I don't know what those numbers look like, because I don't know what numbers they're relying on. And I come back to that point that if we knew what metrics we were using, we would know what decisions are being made.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're being very nice. I mean, you're saying 3 weeks ago. I would have said back in September. I mean, why has this not been prepared? I mean, like they keep saying that. Last summer they said it was going to go away, and then they said there weren't going to be a second wave, and then boom, here we are. We're in the third wave almost. I mean, look, and you talk kind of data. I mean, they did have this information just before Christmas, middle of December. They said that the infection had mutated. So, I mean, ultimately, they should have just been prepared and just been getting things ready. I mean, it's so reactive. Let me ask you a question. If you made the same level of I don't want to say mess, but if you kind of operated in the same way in terms of your school, do you think you would still have a job?
No, like I said to you, TJ, I cannot operate on those levels. You know, I cannot work in a way that doesn't give other people an opportunity to understand my decisions and to carry out their roles and to understand why I'm making these decisions and what I'm basing my decisions on. That's leadership, right? Leadership is about not just showing people the way, but taking people along with you, you know? And if you're not taking people along with you, then you're just going for a walk all by yourself. That's not really leadership. So yeah, no, first and foremost, I would not operate like this. There would need to be some sort of, informed methodology to my decision making, which seems absent, if I'm brutally honest. And secondly, if I was working like this, then I would be sowing the seeds of chaos and confusion in my organization, which we are seeing in many ways in education nationally. But don't get me wrong, we're seeing some good decisions in terms of the things that they're doing. Yeah, testing should be in schools so that we can guarantee that we're safe to open. Good decision. The timing of that decision, not so great. It means there's an extra level of pressure around what we do, but we can do it. Because we can step up to the challenge, because as an organization and as a staff body, we will do it and we will step up to the plate in order to get things done. But there's an added layer of stress there. There's an added layer of anxiety there. And that's when, those stresses and those strains are when people start sending letters from unions, or when people start looking for, clauses in health and safety regulations, right? This isn't because teachers don't want to work. This isn't because teachers don't want to be in school. It's because of the chaos and confusion and the anxieties that are born as a result of that. But as schools, we are doing all we can to minimize that confusion. We are doing all we can to add calm to the situation. We're doing all we can to make sure that we are safe in our situation. But we're having to deal with something that is quite poor, and poor for the reasons that I've said.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible. Your job is absolutely impossible at the moment. And I mean, look, ultimately, I don't think it's just your trust. Every single school, every single teacher has had to adapt phenomenally in the last year. And I mean, absolute credit needs to go to the profession. And in some respects, it absolutely winds me up where we've seen the fireworks and the mention of NHS captain Tom Moore, and all these mentions. But teachers haven't kind of been given the appreciation they deserve for the level of efforts that you've put in over the last year. Adapting, being innovative in the way that you're going to capture these children's interest, and going out, giving food, and you've been a part of the community, and ultimately just the recognition, or the lack of recognition rather, from the government, in my opinion, has just not been good enough. And when I'm speaking to head teachers and I'm speaking to senior leaders across the country, I mean, it's almost like the level of frustration. I mean, they want to leave the profession because they just don't feel supported. I mean, if a good head teacher will come into a school school, and this is from my experience, what a good head teacher will do is they'll go into a school, they'll put their trust in their staff, they'll give them autonomy, but like they'll give, like, empower them, you know, like it'll come from them. They'll feel like they're on a journey. I mean, like, I have not heard one head teacher say that that's how they feel about the way that education is operated in the UK. You know, like, I almost feel like maybe it's time where education is actually run by educators, because they know what's in, like, what goes on in the school. The frustration sometimes lies where you've got someone like Gavin Williamson, that, albeit he went to a public school, but he went there 30 years ago. Like, he's never been on your side of the table in terms of in the classroom, you know, and like, he doesn't know what it takes. So he doesn't know what it's like to have 30 primary school kids that are like 8 years old, and you're trying to do social distancing. So, like, how is he meant to give the correct advice? It's like me. I've been to hospital. It doesn't mean I know how to do heart surgery. You know, like, I mean, why not give it to the professionals, the specialists, that what they do, and get them to collaborate, whether it be head teachers from across the country that are complete diverse range of opinions and views, and you collaborate, or like you come to a union where there were ex-educators and they're collaborating with schools and head teachers. And I guarantee you the whole efficiency of education will move forward. Like, is that something you feel like is needed for education?
Let me give you an example from like government decisions based around their clinical medical decisions that they've been making currently. So we know who the UK Chief Scientific Advisor is around medical decisions. You know, we've got Sir Patrick Vallance, and we've got Chris Whitty. Right, so we've got those two people who are advising the government around this pandemic in order to make the right decisions for how we mitigate, you know, the spreading of the virus. Right, and absolutely, when you're in a corner and you're fighting a battle that's a medical battle beyond anything else, right? It's a biological battle beyond anything else. You're going to ask the specialists in medicine, and you're going to ask those people who know that industry inside out what the right decisions are and what those decisions should be. I don't think there is such a position as a chief education advisor to the government. You know, there are lots of different types of you know, roles within all the different ministries, and you know, and if you like, sub-organizations within the structure of government. But you know, would an education secretary who was an expert in education help in this current climate? Yeah, absolutely. But a lot of those people are working in Ofqual. A lot of those people are working in Ofsted. And, you know, I just wonder how much those voices are being listened to and heard. You know, and there are lots of different organizations and you know, regulators out there who do have the voices of the schools as part of their decision-making process. You know, how much are they being listened to? Again, I don't know. But like I said from the very start, when I spoke about the safety and the well-being of my school and my staff and my students, I spoke about it being an inclusive conversation and having everyone involved in that decision-making process. Has that happened at this level of government? I don't think it has done. You know, if it has, then I don't know about it. You know, has the teaching profession really been consulted in terms of the decision-making processes that have allowed the teachers then to have, you know, due notice of decisions that are to come? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for everyone that's in the profession watching, I think it's very much time that we can understand. And I mean, not everyone's going to agree with this, but I think there are a lot of people that feel like, you know what, it's time that education comes back to the professionals. And I mean, like with NHS, they're giving like a 10-year budget, and then they kind of giving it to the specialists and say, look, like you've got 10 years to really like kind of improve NHS. I think that needs to happen with education. I mean, one of the beautiful things about the vibe is that they have a Ministry of Education full of ex-educators, and they don't go in the form of judgment, but they go in in a supportive capacity as a supportive friend, and really make sure that they're listening to the schools and they are working on trying to bring in policies that are really going to implement a positive change in the schools. What are we doing here? I have no idea. I mean, during this pandemic, since Gavin Williamson's come into power, I think it was October 2019, I've seen him twice or 3-4 times at the very most. You know, like where has he been? And unfortunately, in a time of need, in a time of panic, we need our leaders to step up. And unfortunately, he hasn't done it, in my opinion. And I genuinely believe, for any educators that are watching here in the UK, please let's stand up and say, let's bring education back to the educators, because if we're ever going to move education forward, it needs to come back to the specialist, in my opinion. But look, Saqib, I mean, it was absolutely lovely having you, man. I mean, you've obviously given us your views, and I know it's a difficult time, but hopefully people will listen, and hopefully we can start making a change. But I mean, I wish you all the best of luck for the rest of this year. And I mean, thanks for coming on, mate.
Yeah, TJ, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.